All right, so folks, welcome to this most tubular, radical episode of Trampled Underfoot Podcast. Now, I know that those are like cultural words that we used in the 80s. That's kind of like when I was listening to music, but frankly, um, unlike a few of my friends of the time, I went back in history as well because I was just consuming the music. So, um, what's going on? This is leading to something, isn't it?
I just wondered where tubular came from. You totally got me off guard there, man. But
You're
that's
welcome.
okay. That's heavy, dude. That's real heavy.
Well, see, that's some 60s stuff there, right? 60s, 70s.
Late 60s, early 70s. 60s was mainly far out, man.
So, we have done the unthinkable and we've crunched our favorite top 10 albums of all time. And we're going to go ahead and offer you those. And we know that this is this is dangerous ground because people love their albums, you know.
Right.
Any words, Mark?
Well, we should clarify. You chose your top five, and I chose my top five. And we may or may not agree with one another. So this may not be the definitive top 10, but in our opinions, these are our top five favorites.
That's right.
But I also reserve the right to change my mind on something.
The caveat on my end will be that in order to actually choose albums, one has to exclude others, and that is a very difficult thing for a music fan to do. But nonetheless, we've decided to go ahead and do it, and at the risk of alienating half the rock universe.
Well, I'm going to alienate half the rock universe anyway because one of these is not a rock album, but that's okay.
Well, there is no. Okay, so mind you, the whole rock thing. I guess that's not fair to say either because it's all encompassing albums. By any means, one can choose, some sort of like orchestral thing, and it's all valid because this is from the perspective of music lovers. I tend to be biased towards the rock, but point taken, Mark.
Yeah.
So you ready to do this?
I'm ready to do this.
Who do we have out there, by the way? Do we know?
We have, oh my gosh, we have people watching. Uh-oh. Well, there's Daniel Haryu from the Country Bed Shop. Billy Burt, Driveway Workshop with Jim Bashirs. Steve with Harnell Media, Webmaster to the Stars. Oh boy, there's Javi's out there from Javi's Wood Shop. SDM Custom Woodworking in the house. And oh boy, we got all kinds of people out here.
All right.
So welcome aboard, y'all.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So again, you guys and gals listening and, participating here, you could also counterpoint us. It's totally up, for points of views. I am a little bit worried here because once I make a decision in music, that's it. It's done. But so who goes first? How do we do this?
Do it however you want to. It was your idea. Hit us with your.
Okay. So
now I do have one question. Are we going in any particular order, or are we just throwing them out shotgun style?
Well,
are you going to start with your number 5 favorite and work your way to number 1, or?
So I did. We should go from number 5 down to 1.
Okay.
So I guess we could do that. Let's do it that way and work our way up to our number 1. And another thing we'll do is that we'll do one me, one you, one me, one you until we reach the top 10. And whatever conversations occur through it,
Okay. All right.
Okay. So up to number 10, or it would be my 5, but yeah, it would be my 5 because we couldn't collate the two. So here's my first pick, and that's going to be the Graceland album by Paul Simon. It was released on August 25th of 1986 by Warner Brothers Records. And this album to me is personally a very powerful, poignant sort of era. For I grew up, right, hearing my aunt feeding me different music. And one time we did a long trip, and the long trip was well, it wasn't a long trip, but it was a long trip for me as a kid towards Naples, on the west coast of Florida. And she popped in the newly released Graceland cassette into the car. We were in a Volvo or something to that effect. I think it was a Volvo. That's what they drove at that time. And I heard the first song that came out of that, and it was like this tribal chant. And I just asked to repeat it. She repeated it one time, and then I asked to repeat it again, and the whole family in the car was like, "No, that's it. Let the album play." Because just that song alone opened up a whole new way of listening to music, because it was a tribal people chanting. So anyhow, just let me go through this. The lyrical content on that album is spectacular, powerful, deep, poetic, just like Paul Simon always has been. And just one quote from one of the songs, the main song, Graceland, or the title song that encompasses the album. He says, "The Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. I am following the river, down the highway, through the cradle of the Civil War. I'm going to Graceland." What a beautiful opening lyric from that song, title of that album. It's Americana. And yet what's happening is, and he's going through the Mississippi Delta, it brings you images of Civil War, which he says, it creates this sort of, it sets up the album. And yet it's African musicians. So he gathered African musicians in 1985 and through 86. And the album has Boy in the Bubble, Graceland, I Know What I Know, Gumboots, Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes, You Can Call Me Al, Under African Skies, that he did with the lady from, what's that band that you like a lot?
Which one? You'll need to narrow that down slightly.
It was the wife and husband team that they split up. That band, I forget her name.
Tina Turner?
No. Anyways,
I don't think she was on that album.
Not Tina.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the album. I'm sorry, I can't remember it. I might remember it later. It had You Can Call Me Al, Under African Skies, Homeless, Crazy, Volume 2, and Around the World, or Myths and Fingerprints. What a beautiful album. So that's my first pick here.
Okay, I've heard parts of it. I have not been able to sit down and listen to the whole album. I don't own it. But knowing Paul Simon's writing style, I've got a couple of his other albums, post Simon and Garfunkel. He's an absolutely phenomenal songwriter, as everybody knows already.
Very much.
But what I have heard of the album, it's something that I really do need to explore a little deeper. You know, I've heard certain selections off of it, but I've not actually sat down and listened to the entire album.
I will say this, there is a documentary of it from that era, and he had a lot of pushback on many levels. The album was given an award. I think it was, let me see here if I can find the award exactly. It was the highest charting album in over a decade for him. And if I can see what he won, I think he won, what is it, a Grammy? Yeah. Well, I don't have that actual information in front of me, but the album is a beautiful album because he used all these musicians from Africa. And what happened was that the public, because of apartheid and all that, right, they were giving him sort of the heavy load and pushback of him sort of stifling the move for people to integrate and whatnot. And they accused him of using the musicians, although he named them on the album and all that. I think it was Stevie Nicks from that sang with him.
Well, I know Linda Ronstadt.
Linda Ronstadt.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm sorry.
I
That's
know
the one.
she was on it, but I didn't know. Like I said, I've not listened to the entire album,
Hmm.
so I didn't know. Maybe Stevie Nicks was on it, or maybe
No,
somebody else was on.
no, you're right. Linda Ronstadt. So there was controversy around it, but it did chart, and it was like number. It was a big deal.
Mhm.
So how about yours? What's?
Well, one more thing I will say about it, I do remember uh, the controversy around the album, because it's like you said, at that time there was a huge pushback. I mean, one of the big hits of the area was a whole bunch of people got together and they recorded a song called "I Ain't Gonna Play Sun City." Sun City was being a huge South African resort down there,
Hmm.
and that brought in, you know, top names to play to get people to come up out of Johannesburg to come out to the resort. And there was a huge push against any kind of, it was a giant boycott against the South Africa.
Yeah,
And this was seen as breaking that boycott. And he got a lot of flack for that, even though he did go there to get African voices on it, because I won't say all things African were real popular at the time, but the plight of the South African people was hugely popular, and the music was starting to get popular. There were others who did the same. They brought musicians to America. They didn't go down there and record, and that was the problem. That was the
yeah.
controversy.
Well, he one other thing to say about Paul Simon. He's a big subject. He's not a tall guy, but he's a big subject because
Yeah,
he, to me, encompasses songwriting to the highest of levels. And Paul Simon, his previous album didn't do as good, and yet the lyrical and musical, it's just amazing. But there's so much being pumped out there that things go by the wayside throughout history. We see this, but he actually had received a cassette tape of a group. I think it was Black Mambazo or
Mombasa. Yeah,
something to that, and that those are the chanting ones, the ones that
right,
I listened to when that album, and I just was uh, just jaw dropped. And he, because of that, it spurred him on to pursue this whole idea. And that
right.
album, although we have Bridge Over Troubled Waters and what was that album, Rosemary and Thyme, uh,
Oh, Scarborough Fair.
Scarborough Fair. He had so with Garfunkel so much in the back,
Right.
content. He's a big subject. That was my choice. And I what? So do you like that? Well, you haven't heard the full album.
I haven't heard the full album, but you know, and I'm not going to tell you if it's a good choice, a bad choice, because it's a
Okay.
personal choice. You know, I'm
Yeah.
not going to justify anything to anybody, man.
Okay. All
It's
right.
just
Fair
it's
enough.
just your, you know, one of your favorites.
All
Now
right.
I'm going to change gears and completely throw people for a loop and say my number 5 favorite album. Started out, it was released in 2 parts, but then it was all put together in later releases, and that's Joe's Garage by Frank Zappa.
Oh, amazing.
And that it became a 3 album set, or a 3 disc CD set, and it's basically a rock opera that follows a character by the name of Joe, who sang and played with a garage band as a teenager, and it works its way through his life in a quote unquote society where music is outlawed. And it kind of foreshadowed his Zappa's involvement, you know, testifying before Congress
Yeah.
and fighting off the lyrical censorship that became real hot and heavy in the late 80s and early 90s. And the you know, what can you say about something that's that long? I mean, we're talking a 3 album set. It's the music styles go all over the place, everything from you know, blues to doo-wop to kind of a fusion style, and everything in between, a little bit of reggae thrown in just because. But the way the album was recorded, the story it tells, The lyrics, some of the songs are just downright funny. Some of them are serious as a heart attack. But it's an album set. It's a story that makes me laugh, and but it tells a very important story and has a very important message attached to it.
Very good.
So it's just
Well,
one of those albums.
so I have that album. I don't listen to that, or have not listened to it as much. So it's interesting. I'm going to have to go back and sit and listen through the whole thing. I mostly would sit and listen to the Mothers of Invention, their first one. There's one where he does doo-wop, something in the Jets or something to that effect.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't remember the time. It'll come to me.
Yeah,
I know who you're Ruben and the Jets.
Ruben and the Jets, and as well as Chic, Your Booty.
Chic Your Booty, one of my favorite records.
And the thing about him is that, so I'm totally liking that choice. And the thing about Zappa is that he was irreverent, but people think that irreverent is lacking sometimes in depth. I'm not saying everybody, but there's a sort of standardized perception of irreverence. It's like he went against the grain, and he created some fantastic stuff, and he didn't take himself too seriously, and at the same time he was such a phenomenal person, composer, musician. So I don't have much to say other than Frank Zappa is not for everybody, but if you sit and listen and enjoy it on a musical level, it's sort of like a little spider's web of an adventure with his music. So I totally dug that choice.
Yeah, he was never ever afraid to experiment, and some of it was, he was anything but mainstream. I mean, you don't just turn on the radio and hear Zappa, it just doesn't do it. But there's a word for it, and it's going to come to me here in a minute. But what he did, especially a lot of on Joe's Garage, was he would take guitar solos that had been performed live on stage and then incorporate that into the tune. And his drummer on this album was Vinnie Colaiuta, would just come up with a good tune to put to it. And it's been said that Frank Zappa just blew out and burned out more drummers than you could count, and he did. But Vinnie Colaiuta, he nailed this entire album. And in fact, Modern Drummer magazine, on this album, he was named the most technically advanced drummer ever. And they ranked the album of one of the top 25 greatest drumming performances of all time.
Awesome.
And but it was just taking that guitar solo from another performance maybe 6 years ago and bringing that in and creating the tune around it. That's and adding rhythm tracks and bass and everything else to it and incorporating it into the tune. There's a name for it, and I can't remember what it's called right off the top of my head. Zeno something. I can't remember what it's called.
He did another cool thing about him is that, and I was thinking that when you were saying until you said it, as you were going through the explanation with the drums. And so he did that a lot. He would pull things from the past, live concerts, this and that, and he would bring them in, and he'd totally rework them or incorporate sounds, just portions of songs. It could be a lead guitar alone. It could be the bass, it could be the rhythm section, and he'd recreate things. He used everything as his canvas. And that before, way before the time of the rap and all these things where they take samples and mix and match things up, he did that with his rock music or his music, just generally speaking. So yeah, just an incredible talent.
It's called Xenocronous recording. I just couldn't remember it off the top of my head. Sorry.
And it's defined as what exactly? What's the actual definition for it?
It is, let's see here. It's basically overdubbed from older live recordings.
Okay.
It is a studio-based musical technique developed at an unknown date, but possibly as early as the 1960s
Yeah,
by
definitely.
Frank Zappa, who used it on several albums. It's executed by extracting a guitar solo or other musical part from its original context and placing it into a completely different piece of music and forming the music around it.
Yeah, just incredible.
Yeah.
What a good choice. I'm glad that we added Zappa to this list. This is not your granddaddy's top 10 list.
Right.
Well, wait a second. It might be because that's what granddaddies were doing. They were rocking the cash bar back then.
Yeah.
All right.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So going to my next one, which would be my number
4.
What number would be 4?
Yep.
Okay, so my number 4 is going to be T-Rex Electric Warrior, issued 1971.
Whoa.
Oh yeah, have you heard that album?
Actually, no. I can sit here with full confidence and say I have never listened to a T-Rex album. I've listened to one song, and that was Bang a Gong. Get it on.
Well, sure enough, Bang a Gong is on this album.
Okay.
And so this album was issued in 1971, and it reached number 1 in the UK charts and became the best-selling album of 1971. The top 10 single was Bang a Gong, Get It On. The album is credited as the first glam record album, or the pioneering and development of glam rock, which eventually led us into the 70s, full throttle, glamorized rock and roll, and then into the 80s hair metal, and dying off during the grunge era, and now has seen a resurgence here and there. But of course, we live in a new digital era where people have all sorts of entertainment. But this album is one of the best examples of just a beautiful, from beginning to end. The songs they're sort of teetering on that 60s vibe that you would hear with songs that were rock based, and yet something new. There was a little bit. It's a strange way to explain it, but it's very poppy. It has a lot of pop to it, and yet it's a new direction that's not mainstream. So he had there's 11 songs on it: Mambo Sun, Cosmic Dancer, great songs, Jeepster, Monolith, Lean Woman Blues, Get It On the next side, Planet Queen, Girl, The Motivator, Life's a Gas, and Rip Off. Each of those songs has a beautiful melody and guitar structure and whatnot. That's my choice of number 4. And if you've not heard it out there, it's definitely worth a listen.
Okay, it's T-Rex, and what was the name of the album again?
It's T-Rex, and it's Electric Warrior.
Electric Warrior. Okay.
The cover has him, Mark Bolan, which consequently passed away early on. I think it was in the late 70s in a car crash. But he's on the cover, and there's like a glow around him. The cover is black, but there's like a yellow glow to show him and the amplifiers in the back.
Okay. And it's funny. T-Rex is having a resurgence here lately. I have heard more about T-Rex in the last 2 years than I have, oh my gosh, the previous 30. So there has been a resurgence. I don't know if people are just discovering it or what, but I've heard more about him here lately than I have in a long time.
He actually played Woodstock. Mm-hmm. He was an acoustic group at the time, and he played Woodstock. And then right off the heels of that first, he did maybe like 2, maybe 1 or 2 purely acoustic hippie, like Peace, Love, and all that. But when he introduced the electric guitar, everything changed because the melodies and stuff. And he had a very he had a strange little vibrato to his voice that was really good for rock. And he was glam, so he'd paint his eyes and this and that. And yeah, just when he went rock, it's an awesome album.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, this one's going to kind of, I don't know, you're going to, I've said it many times before, you're going to agree with me or disagree with me based on that. But number 4 for me, and maybe you think I sold out because it's too commercial, but Abbey Road by the Beatles.
I agree with you already. And
I mean, you know, it's number 4. So you're probably thinking, oh, what's he got coming up for above that? But I can't think of a bad thing to say about the album. I mean, and the way I picked out my top 5 albums was I made because I couldn't go through and eliminate records like you were talking about. But what I did was I said, what 5 albums would I consciously decide to get up and go dig in the closet, open up a box and root through to put on the turntable and listen to? And that's definitely one of the top 5. If for no other reason, just for side 2. I've said it many times, both on the podcast and off, that I think side 2 of that album is one of the best engineered albums that's ever come out. And just sit back, turn down the lights, throw on the headphones, and just listen to it. And listen to the songs blend, listen to the background. You will hear things going on in the background that maybe shouldn't have made the cut. There were some edits done during engineering that you can hear if you listen. You'll find those edits, but they were blended in real smoothly. There's a running theme. I know the band had several disagreements over the album, and it was the last album they recorded together as a group.
Yeah.
In 1969. I know Let It Be was released after they split up.
But recorded first.
But it was recorded first. And in fact, I believe it was going to be called Get Back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was called to be called Get Back, but it was released after the group broke up as Let It Be. They were still having a bunch of arguments over the White Album, which had already been released. But they got everybody together and they did record. John Lennon and Yoko Ono had been involved in a car accident, and he was so freaked out about that. She was confined to bed rest, and he was so freaked out about that, he had a bed put in the studio for her to lay there in so that she could still be involved. And that kind of cheesed off the other 3. And there were some disagreements about the music. John Lennon didn't like Maxwell's Silver Hammer. He called that a granny song.
Yeah.
And, various other things like that. But each one of them contributed both musically, lyrically, and performance-wise to the album, and it was the last time they got together in one studio and recorded. So, but just as far as musicality is concerned, it is one of my top 5.
So I'm going to have to I'm on board with you 125% on that one. Heck, we'll go the full 150%. A couple of things about that. So they were pissed off because of Yoko laying in bed while they're trying to get their recordings going. A couple of things about what you said. Yes, Paul McCartney, he did a lot of the sweet songs and whatnot, but he Beatle it up, Mm-hmm. And because of that combination, the Beatles were magical in my opinion. But John Lennon was not happy about Paul. That second side that ran on connected that you like was Paul McCartney's idea.
Right.
And John Lennon did not want that. He wanted straight up rock and roll songs, get it over with. But Paul pushed, and that secondary side that runs together, which is beautiful, occurred.
Yep. And he and George Martin pushed John Lennon into agreeing to it.
Yeah.
And in fact, I guess a couple of the breaks that are in there, there's a break before the beginning of Sun King. Here Comes the Sun King. That was done to kind of appease him. But he did not want to get into medleys. He said it's nothing. He called it trash. He called side 2 trash. He says it's just a bunch of short snippets of songs. There isn't really a tune in there. So he really did not like side 2 of Abbey Road.
There's a song on that album called "Oh Darling," and it's a piano based guitar and the whole thing, but it's piano based, and it's a throwback style song, but it's kind of heavy duty with the vocals, where it goes, "Oh darling, bum 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 bum, please believe me." Well, Paul McCartney is the composer of that song and the performer, but he was having trouble getting the raspy that you hear on the final album, and he did so many takes. John Lennon liked that song so much. This is just to put it juxtaposed with Lennon trashing Paul McCartney, but at the same time, he would want to take, and this is not the first time it happened, he wanted to take some of Paul's songs and be the lead singer on it. And John's voice was pretty good, but Paul refused, and he finished singing it. And you could hear where he doubles up his voice and stuff. He's trying to rough it up, and he did a great job. But Lennon would probably have done something really radically awesome as well with that song.
Yeah. Yeah, that is for sure. He said he would, Paul McCartney said he would go in early and he would record that. He'd do one take a day because he was trying for that raspy. And he would go in early in the morning trying to catch that raspiness, because he said he wanted it to sound as though he'd been performing on stage all week long.
Yeah.
So, and you're right. Lennon said he wanted to sing it, but because he thought it was more his style.
And it probably was.
Yeah. But, performers are performers, and they're pretty protective of their stuff,
And just one last thing about that album, because there's look, so far I've not offered any Beatles. I'm glad you did, but just to say, because it is my favorite band of all time. And I just want to say, I'll say one thing. I wish that at this point in life I had never heard of the Beatles, so that I can rediscover them again and listen to them all over again with fresh ears and not having the knowledge. Because when I first discovered the Beatles, way past their time, and it was the 80s, late 80s, actually, when I first decided to purchase a Beatles thing, because I said, what is this? Because we were involved in the hair metal. But I said, no, we got to, and I'd heard them before, but never had an album. You hear them on the radio and all. And I wish I could experience that all again, because the magic from that, the stories, the connections, man, I just high five and power. I like that choice so much, dude.
Okay. Well, so we're down to your number 3 now.
Okay. I just, that album, I mean, we could stop here and we're all good, because there's no way, but I'm going to go on. And I'm choosing I'll just say this, I'm choosing the ones that were significant to me and not necessarily super mainstream. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but they were significant to me. My number, what? 4?
3.
My number 3 is Unplugged by Eric Clapton.
Good album.
And it was good album, yeah. It was recorded in front of a small audience in England, and it was recorded in 1992, or at least released in 92, I believe. So the album is Eric Clapton. A lot of us know this album. Sitting on a stage, small audience, recorded live, upright bass, the drums, all the instrumentation, him with his acoustic guitar, unplugged. It is a journey through blues in a very, I guess, I don't want to say country style, but without the electric of the blues, you really hear all the little notes and the combination of instruments. And if you put headphones on and you just sit and it's a journey. It's British people doing blues, American blues, and it's just the most wonderful thing on earth. That album inspired me to try to sort of sing, right? I heard Eric Clapton because of the, I'll just say this, hearing all the instruments so close, you feel like you're sitting there in the audience. And by listening to his voice and that, me being a musician, I would sing just to fill in, but I never really considered singing as a thing. And I heard him and I could actually relate the closeness of that album. So it's got Before You Accuse Me and Hey Hey, Tears in Heaven, Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out, just a bunch of songs, San Francisco Bay Blues. And that's my album.
Yep. You mentioned San Francisco Bay Blues. That's one of my favorite songs on that album. I agree with you 100%. And in fact, that was one of them that I really struggled with. It is not on my list, but it jumps up into that list on occasion, just depending on my mood. And that's why I said at the very beginning, on the onset, I reserve the right to change my mind on things here and there. It is in my top 5 at times. It just depends on my mood.
Yeah.
Now, and I'll also be frank. When the first time I heard the unplugged version of Layla, I thought, what the hell is this? But as I heard it a second and then a third time, it kind of grew on me a little bit. And the whole thing was recorded for MTV. They had the series Unplugged.
Yeah.
And I don't remember if it was Clapton's performance that this album came from, or if it was another performance by somebody earlier. They made one concession because the whole basis behind the Unplugged series was no electric instruments at all. And they made one concession on the Clapton session, was they did allow electric organs.
Right.
Because they didn't want somebody sitting there pumping an organ up,
Right.
But and Chuck Lavelle played piano and organ on that set. Nathan East on bass. And yeah, there's not a bad song on it. Not a single one.
It's a beautiful journey. Mm-hmm. A lot of the songs he had pre-recorded as rock, full instrumentation, electric. But it's such a beautiful journey, and really the main thing for me was that listening to music like that in that format, mm-hmm. for me was because I record music, and more so before than now, but it really started me thinking in a different way, because you can play those songs with your acoustic guitar with no extra fluff in it at home, and that association that you don't need other people. You can get the basic sound of it did help me out a lot, and plus the vocal thing. It's a beautiful album. It's very important in my little journey.
Yep. My reason for mentioning MTV was I remember when it came on MTV, and I recorded it on VHS. I've still got that tape floating around somewhere. And in between songs, as they cut in and out for commercials, or just they wanted to actually talk about something like Tears in Heaven.
Yeah.
Obviously he acknowledged the death of his son and everything else, but there was also one tune that was on the MTV broadcast that was not included in the album, and it was credited as being called The Circus Left Town. Mm-hmm. And it was later included on another album called Circus, and it was directly about his son, about their last time really spent together, took him to a circus. And excuse me. And also in one of those little interviews, he was talking about Layla. And he said he didn't get nervous very often, but he was extremely nervous about doing that because it had been around for so long.
Yeah.
And he slowed it down, set it to a shuffle, added a couple of different chord changes to it, and really didn't know how it was going to be received. And he said he was really nervous about doing it and kind of had to be talked into it.
It's such an
but
earthy.
I think it fit.
Oh, I think so too. I mean, it's such an earthy. You can feel the dirt beneath your feet when you listen to that, and I kind of like that. And that's the thing that I like about the blues, and sort of, you know, Americana music, especially when it's low to the ground. There's something special about that. I like the heavy stuff and the crazy out of your head stuff as well, but there's
Yeah.
something that has staying power about the earth beneath your feet, and I kind of use that with that sort of acoustic, sort of generated, performances. I just so yeah, that was mine. So what's your number two?
Number three.
Your number three.
Yeah, and I'm kind of glad that Abbey Road was not seen as a sellout, because I think this one will be seen as a sellout because everybody says it, but everybody says it for a reason, and that's Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd. I mean, what else can you say? Put on the headphones, shut off the lights, shut up, and listen to music. I mean, you run the gamut from real high energy stuff down to real slow, mellow stuff, and every emotion you can think of is put in that album. The technical aspects of it, you got to remember, it was recorded in 1973. There weren't a lot of effects. There was no auto tune. What you heard were guys who were masters at their craft. I've said it before and I'll say it again. You have guitar wizards like Joe Satriani and Steve Vai, who will use 10,000 notes in a 1-minute solo to convey a story. David Gilmour will take 8 notes and write you a 500-page novel. It's just the way it is, you know. Leo Fender invented the Stratocaster, and God invented David Gilmour to show people how it was supposed to be played, and that's just my opinion. So
It's a beautiful album. There's a lot to be said about that album too. It is an album that is on a lot of people's top, list, because simply, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. It's there. It's in front of you. The album plays like a total concept, a journey. It's rock symphony. When I first heard it, it was at a friend's house here in Sweetwater. He was going to give me a bunch of records from his older brother that had turned to either he got older or was like going to church and said rock is evil. And I went after school with my friend, his younger brother. And at that time, he also played me he gave me a stack. And then he said, well, you got to hear this one. And he put on Dark Side of the Moon. And the way it starts is with that repeating pulse.
That heartbeat.
That heartbeat. And then it goes, doesn't it start with the...
Yeah. Then there's there's kind of a montage of some of the voices and the music you hear. They get a little bit into the intro to Money, and then you have Claire Torrey, some of her vocals from The Great Gig in the Sky.
But there's a slow build up in the beginning, right?
Well, they go straight into Breathe.
Okay.
And you may be thinking of On the Run.
Is that on side 2? Where does On the Run fall?
I think it's the second. I think it's the second tune. After get the track list here. Well, Speak to Me, then Breathe, then On the Run. It's the third one.
So wherever he put the needle, I'll say it that way because it has been like over 30 something years.
Right.
Wherever he dropped the needle, I was sitting there, and remember, this is the 80s. I was in junior high school, and I was listening to Tesla and Van Halen and Metallica and all these things, and the 60s stuff you'd hear on the radio in the oldies station. But I'm like looking for records that rock, man. And he puts this on, and I hear like this, and I'm like, dude, take that crap off. What is that? And he said, dude, you got to hear this album. And once he started playing that, I was like, I wasn't ready for that.
Yeah.
But after the fact and really sitting down, once my musical, boy, good choice.
They released Money as a single, and that was my first exposure to it. And then I was, oh, hey, I like this. I'm going to need to go check this album out. And the album was everywhere. I remember that cover everywhere. Record store I used to go to at the time, Banana Records in Fremont, California, their entire window for like a month, the front window where they normally had a bunch of other stuff, it was nothing but this giant montage of that Pink Floyd album cover. I mean, it covered almost every square inch of the Ding Dong thing. And the posters and tapestries. I mean, the woven carpets that people bought to hang up on their walls and what have you. That Prism album cover. And it was just absolutely fantastic. And I fell in love with them. And that was when I learned the hardest lesson that some of the newer generation hasn't figured out. You don't listen to Pink Floyd songs. You listen to Pink Floyd albums. And that's all there is to it.
A couple of other things from it, because it's such a great one here in Miami, because I saw Javi write that, the laser shows. We had our space planetarium. We had laser shows, I guess, through his time and up until my time, because we would go and watch the lights inside the planetarium and listen to Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and all these things, and we just sit there and stare at the at the ceiling. Let's just leave it at that.
You know what? I haven't thought about that in 40 years, but they used to do the same thing in San Francisco, out in Golden Gate Park at Morrison Planetarium. They would do the same thing, and I think they called it the Laserium show, but I may be wrong on that name. But they did the same thing. It was a laser show inside the planetarium. You're leaned back in these seats that are permanently reclined and just looking up in this huge dome, and the laser show on the ceiling of this dome while they're blasting Dark Side of the Moon, or like you said, I mean, Days of Future Past from the Moody Blues, or Zeppelin 4, or whatever, you know. But they changed it up. It was a constant show. The show would run throughout the summer, and like every 2 weeks, there was a different musical lineup in there. It was really something to see.
Yeah, dude. It was good stuff.
Yes, it was.
Great. And the last thing I'll say about that choice that you just made, there is the whole, what is it? The Wizard of Oz with the
yes, the Dark Side of the Rainbow. When we're finished here, if you've never seen it, right here, after you give us a thumbs up in YouTube, if you've never seen it before, up there in the search bar above my head right now, type in Dark Side of the Rainbow. Sit back and watch. It's fun.
And this is a thing where someone somewhere down the line decided to play the full album of Dark Side of the Moon and lower the volume on The Wizard of Oz and let them play together. And it starts with black and white and Kansas and all that. And as you go through the whole thing, and then the storm and tornado and the music ramping up, it's such a weird connection, yet matches so perfectly.
Yeah, there are certain words and phrases that synchronize in there. And in fact, for many, many years, people thought that that's how the album concept was created. And, you know, David Gilmour and Roger Waters were both asked about it several times. And Roger Waters finally, in a moment of honesty, said, you know, that's not the way it was done. It's a silly way to do an album, but God, we wish it was true.
Yeah.
Because it just was coincidence, you know.
And I don't know if it's a silly way to do an album. I like that idea. It's also it would be an opening door to creativity, because you're matching. All right, guys, this is what we're gonna do for this section of the movie, and so I kind of like the idea in itself. But yeah,
but the logistical nightmare of getting the rights, getting the permission to do that, because you wouldn't be able to create an album based on, pick a movie. You wouldn't be able to do an album based on that without their permission.
Well, wait a second.
You just involved a lot more bureaucracy.
Well, you could use it as a springboard and not attach it officially, and let people figure it out. Or we were inspired by this movie, and I mean,
Yeah.
that's getting into a whole thing. As
Yeah.
long as you don't attach it to the
Right.
look, I love the idea so
Mhm.
much. It's such a great album and the whole concept, and
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay.
So, all right,
All right.
what number is
So
this?
you're number 2.
Okay, well, it's actually a good thing that it's my number 2 right now because my number 2 is Led Zeppelin 2.
Okay. Good album.
And you like that one?
Good album. Very good album.
This is my favorite Led Zeppelin album, and there's a good reason for it, which I guess I'll try to touch on. But this was released October 1969. This was their second album. So their first album, which we actually touched on here on Trampled Underfoot, maybe at the beginning of the year, it's their 50th anniversary of the release of that particular album.
Right.
Well, we have a whole documentary, mini doc, and conversation about that here on this channel that you could check out. And we really did we were really involved in getting it together, Mark and I, and explaining the whole thing. It really came out good. So the video is really good. You could also see the episode by going to trampledunderfootpodcast.com. And where would they go to see that on the site?
On the Wayback Machine, of course, that big red link right on top in the center.
Yeah.
Can't miss it. And you'll find all of our past episodes there.
So if you want to hear it, you could hear it there. Or if you want to see it, you could see it here on the Trampled Underfoot podcast channel. But yeah, mine is Led Zeppelin number 2. And here's the thing about Led Zeppelin. They did not catch a break with critics for a very, very long time. For one reason or another, there's stories galore to touch on that. But this was no different with this album. They released this album, which is just an amazing thing, and the critical reaction was not really positive initially. But on the album, it has Whole Lotta Love, What Is and Should Never Be, The Lemon Song, Thank You, Heartbreaker, Living Loving Maid, She's Just a Woman, Ramble On, Moby Dick, an instrumental, drum instrumental, and Bring It On Home. Here's the thing. This album is amazing to me. The inclusion of Moby Dick creates, all of it creates, but the inclusion of that instrumental where you're rocking throughout the album, you're listening to all this, and then all of a sudden, but there's some blues going on as well. All of a sudden, there's this long, extended drum solo that's so listenable. You could sit back and enjoy it so much. It's missing lyrics. It's got some guitar at the beginning to introduce the drumming, but there's no lyrics. There's nothing. It's just banging on the drums in such creative ways, and then it returns into the rock and roll. The album was recorded in so many different studios, and yet Jimmy Page managed to make it sound like a continuous, beautiful thing. One of my favorite albums. I can't say more other than that's my pick.
Yeah. Definitely a good album. And it's funny because it has my favorite Led Zeppelin song, which is Ramble On. And I don't know why. It's just my favorite Led Zeppelin tune. And it's not one of their wilder, louder numbers. You know, it's pretty mellow when compared to other Led Zeppelin tunes. But it has my favorite Led Zeppelin tune on it and my least favorite Led Zeppelin tune on it, which is What Is and What Should Never Be. I can kind of take it or leave it. But everything else, I dig it. I dig it. But, you know, that's Bring It On Home, I think, was the perfect song to finish the album with. And I think Whole Lotta Love was the perfect album to be the perfect song to begin that album with.
Yeah, it's very listenable to me. I love listening to it with earphones. All these, by the way, all these albums, the listenability of them includes me putting on headphones, because the inclusion of this that I have around my ears while listening to music is very different of an experience when you listen through speakers, because with the headphones you have the panning and the effects right there. It's just, so all this is in context of listening through headphones, which is my favorite way to listen to music.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm with you 100% there. You have not listened to an album until you've listened to the entire thing under headphones. You miss so much, and you
Yeah.
will not, you will hear things you didn't realize were ever there. So, yeah, I'm with you on that one.
So this is your number 2 coming up?
My number 2, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm going back and forth over which should be number 2 and which should be number 1.
Okay.
And I'm finally throwing the dart, and I'm saying number 2 is the soundtrack to the movie Woodstock.
Oh, very interesting pick.
It was recorded, obviously, in August of 1969 and released in 1970. And I was 9 years old at the time, and my dad would not, well, my mother would not let me go see the movie, even though it was about music and everything else. And it's been on TV now countless times. When it came out, it was rated R. And 9 years old, my mother would not let me go to an R-rated movie no matter what. So when Dad brought home the album set, and it was a 3-album set, 6 sides. And the way it was one record was side 1 and side 6, then side 2, side 5, then side 3 and 4. Because on the big turntable, you put all 3 albums on there, and
Right.
it dropped side 1, side 2, side 3. When side 3 was finished, you flip the arm back, turn the whole stack over, and you started at side 4, side 5, side 6. And there are a few songs on the album that I'm not really crazy about. I've never really been much for John Sebastian. I've never really been much for Joan Baez. But you have some performances by Crosby, Stills, and Nash. For instance, and then they later on brought in Neil Young, and they say right on the album that was the second time they'd ever played in public before, was at Woodstock. You know, they did Wooden Ships and Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, Jefferson Airplane, the Butterfield Blues Band, Country Joe McDonald, Arlo Guthrie, Richie Havens, The Who. My absolute favorite live recording by anybody. And that's Soul Sacrifice by Santana.
Beautiful.
Just my absolute favorite live recording by anybody. And of course, Jimi Hendrix closing out the album with Star Spangled Banner, Purple Haze, and then an instrumental solo that he was just kind of working on and ad-libbing. And in fact, when he begins his section, it's about 13 minutes of side 6. They fade into Jimmy playing, and he's talking to the audience. It's okay. You can leave if you want. We're just up here jamming. That's all. You can leave. We understand. He was supposed to be the headliner, and through various mix-ups and mistakes, he was one of the last people to play.
Yep.
And folks were leaving. They were packing up and going. So, but if you've never seen the movie, do see it. If you've never listened to the album set, you can finally find it. It's been re-released several times, but you can find the original version here and there, and do check it out. I mean, there are so many different aspects to it. It was all recorded live, so yeah, there's feedback. Yeah, there's problems here and there. Weather obviously was a big thing. There are some stage announcements that you'll hear and what have you. But it beyond the music, it kind of tells the story of the whole Woodstock Music and Art Fair, wrapped up into one thing. And it's well worth enjoying every minute of it.
What was John? So I'll just say, I love John Sebastian, the Loving Spoonful, the Loving Spoonful. Yeah. Him and the Loving Spoonful. He was the writer. Mm-hmm. They wrote too, but he's such an awesome. I mean, but obviously you don't have great affection for his music.
Well, I don't have great affection for the songs he played on this album.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, it's just these songs. Now, the Loving Spoonful, they were a pretty poppy group when I was growing up, and you did hear them every once in a while. on the radio. But
what were the songs that John Sebastian sang on this album?
Very first song on side one was "I Had a Dream."
Okay, I don't know that song.
And then he did "Rainbows All Over Your Blues."
I've heard that one.
Yeah. And he kind of dedicated it to a woman. Believe it or not, there was a child born there at the concert.
Just one?
Well, the one that was announced anyway. And he kind of dedicated it to the girl and the baby. The girl who had the baby and the baby. So, you know, and it's an okay song. I mean, you know,
Okay.
it's not my style, but you know, I wasn't really thrilled with those particular performances. But you know, everybody from Richie Havens and Canned Heat and Arlo Guthrie, and I mean, all of them. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and I'm not a huge fan of Neil Young's, but they really did good performances.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Neil Young, but I did dig him within Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Was it Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young at that concert, or was that done with?
It was the first two cuts were Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and then Neil Young came out, and it was Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
Okay,
so it was both.
So, you know, that album. So I've seen the footage here and there from different performances. Mostly leading in through Jimi Hendrix, because that was my study, that, you know, and I've not heard the album from beginning to end, simply because I've seen the mismatched, all the stuff. And so I never really sat through the whole thing. Obviously, Soul Sacrifice, I kind of agree with you, is just a magnificent song. I mean,
well, it's the way they engineered the album. For instance, you put on, let's see, and I'm going to probably get this wrong. Soul Sacrifice was, I want to say it was on side 4. Side 4. It was the first tune. But the first 3 minutes of the track was a rain chant from the crowd. It's just the crowd there, because they were getting torrential thunderstorms. I mean, and they got washed out several times. And the crowd just started clapping and banging on stuff and just chanting, you know, doing this little rain chant thing. And they recorded that, and it just they kind of did a little bit of playing around with it towards the end and sped it up slightly. And they faded from that into Soul Sacrifice.
Oh, that's so cool.
And the way they blended it, it's seamless. You really honestly would think that it was intentional, that they got the crowd to do this so they could lead into the tune. That's not the way it was done. It just so happened that those two tracks fit real close together, so they engineered it to blend in, and it really was done well.
So I'll just say that I did. So the whole thing about music for me is that I'm, from the guitar point of view and creating music, I'm listening to all the instrumentations and the stories lyrically, this whole thing, which we all do, but in the attempt to maybe snag these little ideas, maybe they're riffs or melodic things, snag them and put them inside my little memory bank, and then have it jumbled up and somehow learn from that, and maybe I could do something similar. That inspiration, it might be all the furthest from the truth, but that's the whole adventure and stuff. And I loved the bands from that era. We went to Woodstock 90, was it 94?
A couple, 94, 99. Yeah.
We did the 94 one, me and my friends, and we saw Aerosmith, because this was a whole new era. Aerosmith, right. Metallica. I saw Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I saw Joe Cocker, and I saw Santana. And he brought up Jimi Hendrix's sister, cause I don't know who it was, and Santana was right there. And by the way, it was an awesome thing. And his sister was there, and Jimi Hendrix's sister or cousin or something. And Santana looks up at the crowd. It was nighttime. Night had fallen. It was getting cold. And Santana said, "Man, I'm blown out of my mind. I'm so I'm tripping, man. And the whole crowd went, and then he started his whole thing. Um, it was an adventure. Anyways, that's all I have to say about that. But I I've not heard the whole thing.
Oh, you gotta just drop it on there and drop the needle on it and just go on an adventure. Okay, so unless I don't know how to do basic math, I think we're both down to our number ones.
Okay, so my turn.
Of course.
Okay, my number one might not be heard by many people, but this is my number one, and that is Paul McCartney's Ram album. Ram,
Wow.
released in 1971. The Beatles were over with, and Paul McCartney had retreated into Scotland, I believe it was, and he was having self-doubt. He had released one album previously, and I think simply called McCartney, I believe it was.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, which is also a great trippy album, but very low key. There's not a lot of, the production was low key, and it ends with Maybe I'm Amazed, which is a beautiful song. But this album, he ramped it up. No pun intended. The album's called Ram, and it's got 12 tracks to it, and it was unfavorably reviewed by the majority of critics at the time. He got a lot of pushback, but the album has so many musical, just complicated and creative melodic phrases and instrumentation that it's got a. You should check it out. One of my favorite songs on the album is Monkberry Moon Delight. But you've heard some of the songs from the album, like Uncle Albert.
Yeah, one of my favorite McCartney songs post Beatles is Uncle Albert Admiral Halsey. I just like the way it was mixed.
He's got Heart of the Country on that album, and then Too Many People, Three Legs, which are songs that Paul McCartney went back. John Lennon hit Paul McCartney and his songs on his album. I think it was a few of the albums that he did, and one of them was So Sergeant Pepper Took You by Surprise. The Only Thing You Done Was Yesterday. He sang that, Lennon did, trying to hit via songs McCartney. So they were kind of raw with each other. And Paul McCartney did return the favor on this album, pointing out Yoko as the extra and everything. But Paul McCartney, in my opinion, was a way better musician, songwriter than John Lennon.
Yeah.
Way better. And I think the Beatles would have been nothing without Paul McCartney. Likewise, without John Lennon. But Paul McCartney brought to the table, and I love John Lennon. I mean, don't get me wrong, but McCartney manipulated musical notes to go up and down and through. He was more complicated musically. Not complicated like you were saying, like the virtuoso guitars, but complicated where he would make decisions of melody and changing from the chorus to now a downbeat or a little reprise within the song. And he was using things in such a creative way. A lot of the John Lennon music that we all love from the Beatles era was manipulated and wrapped around Paul McCartney using instrumentation to embellish John Lennon's songs. A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
So if you could actually listen to Lennon after the Beatles, and you'll notice it's a very stripped down musical style.
Yep.
Whereas McCartney, there's complication and just awesomeness going on throughout his career. So this album has, like what I mentioned, he's got another one that a lot of people might have heard, The Backseat of My Car. Baby, we'll go riding in the backseat of my car. Really, a lot of beautiful songs. The album from the beginning to the end is a masterpiece. People later looking back have realized the awesomeness of this album, but people were jaded when the Beatles separated and they were hitting McCartney big time.
Right.
So that's my number one.
Right. And I'll agree with you 100% on your last point right there, because the first two, maybe the first three albums McCartney released after the Beatles, that's all they would compare him to. They would compare McCartney. Well, they did it to Harrison and they did it to Lennon as well. Not near as much, though. They knew George Harrison was out there just a little bit. But Harrison had a little bit better reputation with a lot of other musicians than McCartney did.
Yeah.
Lennon was just seen as way out there. So they kind of got a little bit of slack from the press because I don't think anybody really took him seriously. But McCartney, they constantly compared to the Beatles, and it just wasn't the Beatles. It was never intended to be the Beatles. It was intended to be Paul McCartney. But yeah, I'm with you 100% on that part. Now, I've not listened to the entire album. I've only heard a couple, 3 songs off of it. But one of my favorite McCartney songs, as I said earlier, was Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey. I just liked the way that song was mixed, how it changes up, the vocals, obviously. So maybe I should check out the entire album, especially if it's your number one.
I think you should, but again, so the way I listen to it is I bought it and listened to the whole thing with headphones, and we don't do that as much nowadays. But the real way to sort of get it is doing it that way, because it throws you from one vibe to the next throughout the whole thing. It's man, by the time it gets to Monkberry Moon Delight, that is such a rock and roll song. If some people don't like that, Monkberry Moon Delight is a trip. Have you heard that song?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah,
I'll look it up after we're done.
Yeah. So that was mine. So, well, drum roll, Mark Lindsay's number one.
It should be no surprise to you at all, Eloy, that I'm going to go where I'm going to go. But it's got to be my favorite album. And, like I said, this one bounced back and forth with Woodstock for number one because it depends on my mood. But right now, I'm going with my number one is Texas Flood by Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Beautiful.
I mean, recorded in 1983. It was his debut album, and there's not a bad tune on it. And again, it's not a rock album. The first 2 tunes are they're pretty much rock and roll, Love Struck Baby and Pride and Joy. But then you get into Texas Flood, written by Larry Davis and Joseph Wade Scott, and you cannot deny the blues. I mean, that's just all there is to it. And then, Tell Me, an old Howlin' Wolf tune, and then Testify, which is an instrumental written by the Isley Brothers. Then Rude Mood, which is one of my all-time favorite Stevie Ray Vaughan instrumentals. I mean, it is fast, it's hard, it's driving. It's over 4 minutes. And keeping up that tempo as fast as he is playing for over 4 minutes, it's like, holy cow, and then he wraps it up with Lenny, one that he wrote for his wife at the time, which is a 5-minute instrumental also.
Very beautifully done.
Played on the guitar that she gave him for his birthday. And he named that guitar Lenny. And that's the only tune he plays, or he played with that guitar, both live and on the album.
That album had more songs, right?
Oh, yeah. Mary Had a Little Lamb, Dirty Pool, I'm Crying. Dirty Pool was written by Doyle Bramall and Stevie Ray Vaughan, and he is picking his tail off in Dirty Pool. It's that constant, fast strumming. I mean, not a bad song on the album. It's a romp through blues land as well as rock and roll, and just blinding instrumentals, 100% technique and technical ability. And, to Yeah, I've got it on cassette. I've got it on vinyl. I've got it on CD, and I've got it on my computer. So it's not an album that I have to get up and go dig out of the closet because it's never far away from me.
Well, that was a beautiful choice. I'll just say that I have that album, or had the physical copies, but now have the digital of that and all his albums.
Yep.
And but that album was just seminal. I mean, back to back blues and awesomeness, and he'd speed it up and bring it down, and the quality of the recording and the musicianship, all of them. You know what? That's a great choice for number one, for your number one.
The whole album was recorded in Jackson Browne's studio in 2 days.
Oh, wow.
Jackson Browne caught him at the Montreux Jazz Festival over in Europe and offered them the use of his studio for 3 days. And the first day was spent getting all their instruments in there and getting everything set up and doing sound checks and what have you. They didn't actually do any recording the first day. And Tommy Shannon, the bass player for Double Trouble, later said basically this was a huge, like a hangar. And they set up over in a corner as if they were going to do a live performance. And that's how they played. They played this as if they were doing a live performance in front of people. There was no overdubbing on that album. It's 100% those three people: Chris Layton on drums, Tommy Shannon on bass, and Stevie Ray Vaughan on vocals and guitar. And it was done in 2 days. So.
Yeah, it's a beautiful album. Texas Flood was reprised wasn't it reprised in his live posthumous, the one that Jimmy Vaughn re-edited?
Yes, they reissued it twice. Yeah. Once in '99 with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 extra tunes.
Yeah.
They did Tin Pan Alley, Testify live version, Mary Had a Little Lamb live version, and then Wham live with Lonnie Mack, which is a fabulous tune itself. You talk about serious jam, and put Lonnie Mack and Stevie Ray Vaughan together. Lonnie Mack's album, Strike Like Lightning. Man, it's excellent. And then when they re-released it in 2013, it had 20 songs on it. It was released as a 2-disc set. And they added a whole bunch of other tunes to it. Little Wing, Third Stone from the Sun live, Voodoo Child live, and a bunch of other things that were done on other albums, but various live performances included in it.
Well, awesome. I will say, now that we've gone through our list, that we were at the exclusion of so many other things, but we were still, I think every one of these albums has so much to offer. We understand that there's so much awesome music out there, and we could have just as easily chosen so many others. I had so many that I dropped to the side because, simply put, you have to go with one. So I decided to go with things that were important to me in my musical exploration. And I feel happy with the selections, as we went through it, and now looking, I'm thinking of so many other things that I'd love to add, but the door has closed. This is our top 10.
Yep. Our favorite 10 albums.
That's right.
Each of our individually favorite 5 albums, but put them together, and if my math is correct, I think we have 10. And you know what surprises me? We didn't double up on a single one. I was kind of wondering about that, if we were going to both pick the same album somewhere in the list.
Yeah. We did good. I mean, it's easy. Like, all the ones you picked, I could easily just have picked myself, minus Joe's Garage. I think that because I had not listened to it all the way through, although I have it. Mm-hmm. Minus that one, so I would have probably thought, but Zappa nonetheless would have easily been on the thing. It would have probably been Chic Your Booty. Not for everybody, but some good stuff.
Yep. Yeah, easily. And to kind of give a nod over here on YouTube, I've been watching the chat here, and there have been some suggestions in here that are excellent as well. I mean, Machine Head, Deep Purple,
Oh
excellent
yeah.
album. Excellent album. That's from Billy Burt. Um, let's see, Katie Dotson, The Traveling Wilburys. Not just a super group. They did 2 albums, and I have them both excellent, excellent picks. So the James Gang, Thirds,
Who chose
uh,
that one?
Billy Burt. He also chose one that I'm surprised you didn't pick.
Hmm.
Billy Burt's number 3 was Pet Sounds.
That's I mention it a lot
Hmm.
um, on here when we're talking about this. I sometimes revert to Pet Sounds, and it was a very important album for me. But when I mean very important, I mean probably more important than all the ones I mentioned. To be
Yeah.
honest with you, including Beatles stuff, in a way, because number one, they were Americans, not challenging, but going up against the Beatles' complexity.
Hmm.
Which, by the way, not that there's a feud, but they were back and forth, and it's like a homegrown sort of. Although it's from the West Coast, they decided to work with instrumentation, or Brian Wilson did.
Hmm.
I could say so much. Let's put it this
Oh
way.
yeah.
Let's put it this way. I should have. I don't know what I did with it. I owned the box set of their breakdown of each. It was like I don't know how many CDs. This was when it came out for the first time of all their individual tracks minus instrumentation. I had it all,
Really?
and I would listen to all their just Brian Wilson singing, and then just the guitar and just it had everything. Um, from a music writing standpoint, yeah, Billy, I'll just say that for sure. But we didn't add that one. But good
Nope,
call.
we didn't. Let's see. Katie Dotson also threw in Derek and the Dominoes.
I also thought of that one, Mark, but I was debating
Hmm.
between because so here's the thing. I was debating between that and the acoustic and Me and Mr. Johnson, which was released in early 2000s by Eric Clapton, and I was thinking of what was the other one? The one that has Blues Before Sunrise as well. There's an album that he has
From the Cradle.
From the Cradle, and I was debating all that, and I was debating the one that he did on Miami Beach with an address number, Ocean
Yeah,
Drive or
Ocean
whatnot.
Avenue. Yeah.
To me, that's also a seminal album to me. And Derek and the Dominoes is back to front. I listened to that again and again and again. While all my friends were listening to hair metal band, which I was too, I was also ingesting all this 60s stuff. And Derek and the Dominoes, there's no way to look at it. You start the album and you let it go. The Keys to the Highway, just everything. So right on, Katie.
Yeah, and believe it or not, Javi came up with Dire Straits. Now, I don't know if he meant their debut album or not. One of my favorites that I really had to tussle with, and I think, in fact, Joe's Garage just barely beat it out, was Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms.
Never heard that album. I did not
Oh,
like
wow.
them. I did not like them on a biased level of not going even because I'm going to be honest with you.
Okay.
In the 80s,
Hmm.
I didn't like his bandana over his head.
Hmm.
This is shallow. But but if you remember back when one didn't have money and things haven't changed, to be honest with you, and you'd go to the store or the record store, you'd look and you didn't know who. You'd look at the covers and there was a shallowness, but you wanted to discover new music. Some places did have for you to hear, but I didn't have much of that until later. So when I came across that, I didn't like the bandana. I didn't like his MTV with the little fake robot thing, the cheap graphics. I didn't like it. The tunes were catchy. I understood them to be. I wasn't into it. It seemed I was biased
Yeah.
towards it.
Yeah, you were. And it really surprises me because I truly think Mark Knopfler is one of the most underrated guitarists living. The man is absolutely phenomenal. he can play that thing. And he's got a unique kind of a claw hammer finger pick style. And all of it is played with that claw hammer finger pick style. He doesn't use a pick at all.
He looked to me like a tennis player that decided to make a band. I don't
Yeah.
know. It wasn't for me, biased. I'm admitting it wasn't enough story of like the Beatles. You know, they have the Cavern Club and the dank smell, and you have, you know, Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix. You know, there's all this like coolness going on, and then with this guy, it's like bright bandana. I sort of put him in the category of the pop stuff from the 80s, which, by the way, I like now looking back. But basically, into the Cyndi Lauper and like bass music.
Yeah, not even close. Listen to the album Brothers in Arms and you'll get it.
Well, I'll do that. In fact, I'm going to make it my main thing to do when next I go to listen to music. I'm going to do that and see, and I'll tell you what I think.
Okay.
By the way, I'm admitting that back then as a kid I was biased, right? I was thinking more into the hair metal or at best Cream, where the trippy colors of the album covers, stuff like that. But this looked like it was like a pristine. It looked like I just finished playing tennis and we're gonna go out and I swear to you that's what I thought, and I'm coming clean with you guys on this.
Yeah. Listen to the music, man. Forget about what he looks like. But you know, I love Mark Knopfler, his solo stuff, as well as his stuff with Dire Straits. He did an album with Chet Atkins called Neck and Neck. It just basically him trading licks with Chet Atkins. I mean, some fascinating stuff. The guy is an absolute wizard with that Strat. I just love it.
Well, yeah. I'm going to listen to it. I'm open to that. I have when I get into the music, I consume it, like the stories, the backgrounds, I used to do that. Not so much anymore. I'm a little bit older now, but back in the day, I'd go and buy biography, everything.
Yeah.
Because I was a student of music, not at a school, but at my own school, in order for me to come up with, you know, and learn how to write my own songs and all that. That was just my craziness in my head. And this is something that, you know, that I didn't, I just saw it and I said, you know, but I'm sure that I was wrong. But for a kid at the time, most of my peers were listening to the hair metal and not very involved with going back in time. So I don't want to give myself credit, but I did expand going back, even as far as the 50s.
Yeah.
At the time. So, you know, even though I feel a little bit bad, we'll check out the Dire Straits. We'll sit and listen to the whole album. I will be honest with you at the end of the thing.
I'm sitting here looking at his discography, and it's like, oh my God, the guy has put out probably 30 albums with, you know, Dire Straits, solo albums, soundtracks. He did all of the music for The Princess Bride, Wag the Dog, Cal, and a movie called Local Hero. He's produced, he produced Bob Dylan's album Infidels. He produced Land of Dreams by Randy Newman. I mean, the guy is everywhere. He's one of the hardest working musicians. He's one of the hardest working people in the music industry out there. He's always doing something. Always doing something.
Well, as long as you drop that bandana across your head, man. Did you just finish a tennis tournament, buddy?
No, he was getting physical with Olivia Newton-John. No, he wasn't either.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, he wore that bandana. That bandana really struck I did not like that bandana. I saw, and then the graphics plus the bandana. I was like, no, I'm not having it.
It's nice to know you're not superficial.
Well, look, you have to understand. I was a kid, and adding to the fact that I was a kid, I was listening to things like Megadeth and Metallica and their albums. There's these freaking soldiers with masks, and skulls, and all these things. And then you had the 60s that went into the psychedelic and this and that. And then you had this 80s, like, Wham sort of thing, and I categorized him absolutely into that sort of Wham, and that, which, by the way, again, looking back now, I am quite fond of even the pop stuff from back in the 80s. But still, dude, that bandana, why the bandana?
One time.
Yeah,
but you do this to other people. You don't like Ted Nugent because he wore a loincloth once.
You're right. You're right. Ted Nugent, I soured on Ted Nugent because he wore a loincloth. And I don't like, what's this guy's name? Mick Jagger, because he rubbernecks and ducks across the stage like a flailing lunatic. His hips are too loose. And it sounds superficial, but when I see that image, I'm like, no, man, no, I can't. Yeah. Eric Clapton sits in a chair and plays the acoustic, bad to the bone, or he'll stand up and you can see him chilling with it and stuff like that. Eddie Van Halen jumps on the table and there's like this dancing teacher in a bikini. I dig that. The Beatles are sitting back, long hair and stuff. I dig it. Stevie Ray Vaughan freaking pulls the guitar behind his back, and he's like, he's not the prettiest guy in the world. He's sitting there grinding his teeth and looking at the audience, the sweat dripping. Yep. I dig that.
Permanent stank face.
Permanent stank face. But here comes this guy with a bandana. All he needs is, like, he should be playing a tennis racket.
Yeah. Oh. Listen to the music, dude.
No, I will.
Listen to the music. I'm with you on Mick Jagger. It's almost like he was raised in a house with doors that were only that wide, because he's, doing that kind of thing.
I will say one thing, and I think I've shown it to you, Mark, but I hope that our audience out there, ladies and gentlemen out there, that are listening to this live, and then after the fact, when this comes out on Tuesday, please, to enforce and you don't have to believe me, I just want you to do one thing. Mark suggested that you go check out, what album was it or music that you were saying?
Dark Side of the Rainbow, the Wizard of Oz, Dark Side of the Moon mashup.
Right. Okay, so obviously, we want you guys to check out all this music if you've not done so before or want to relive it. But we had a little extra thing about the Dark Side of the Rainbow. I'm going to offer another situation, and I think Mark knows about it. It's Mick Jagger and David Bowie on YouTube. I want you guys to do this. Type in Mick Jagger, David Bowie music video. No, would it be no audio, Mark? What would be the
no music?
No music.
Let me look it up. Look it up. I'll see if I can find it. I mean, this is all going to get edited out. Now, in keeping with tradition, the fact that I say it's going to be edited out means it's not going to be edited out. So,
yeah, and it's my edit, so
yeah, okay.
I'm going to have fun with this. But I'll just say this while Mark is looking that up. If you type in, please, you deserve.
Okay, here it is.
Okay, what's it called?
Mick Jagger, David Bowie, Dancing in the Street, no music.
Okay. Mick Jagger, David Bowie, Dancing in the Streets, no music. Please, you guys, please type it in afterwards, or if not, don't forget about it. You owe it to yourself from the deepest parts of just the little things that spark life, and happiness in this universe. Watch that. It will make you so cringe. It'll be so cringe-worthy, it's not even funny. That's how I see Mick Jagger, even before seeing that video. And you will understand. That's actually how I see Mick Jagger.
That's how everybody sees Mick Jagger. Are you kidding me? He just happens to be one of the richest guys in music.
So, and by the way, let me be clear. I know the difference between a personal bias and a reality. Sometimes the two things are not mutually exclusive. Sometimes there's a little truth to things. This is just a personal taste thing, and I understand that other people see the value in things that one might not. I do understand that Mick Jagger's a very talented guy, along with Bowie, by far very talented people. But the way I consume entertainment and all this, I like to have. There's a vibe that I like to. I like things to be set up in such a way that it allows me to trip on what I'm listening to. And if you give me a crappy intro, like a guy like gyrating, like not like Elvis, gyrating like Mick Jagger, you know, he looks like some sort of like disjointed skeletal. I can't do it. So, but it doesn't take away that he's not talented. I understand that. So just to be clear.
Yeah. I mean, Sympathy for the Devil,
Great. Yeah.
Gimme Shelter. I mean, you can't ignore, those are excellent tunes. They really are. And the Stones are not one of my absolute all-time favorite bands. But you know, you gotta say, yeah, there are certain tunes that they did where they were on their A game, and you know, heck, even Start Me Up and Jumpin' Jack Flash were good for the time. You know,
I agree.
But, yeah, I can't watch him live. I'm with you there. I can't watch him live.
Yeah, too much. But well, that was a sidetrack to this whole thing.
Oh, does that ever happen to us? No, never. So you think we ought to wrap it up now?
Yeah, I think so too. I really enjoyed hearing what you came up with, and boy, I'm kind of excited. I'm stoked, man. I want to listen to Dire Straits now and hear what the hype is about, and I'll try to wipe that bandana out of my memory banks and just go for it.
I'll throw a few tunes at you, you know, just off to the side here to check out some of his solo stuff and maybe one or two Dire Straits tunes. But if you're going to sit down and listen to an album, pick up Brothers in Arms. I think that's probably one of the better ones.
All right. So thank you guys for joining us this evening. Boy, we had fun. I can't speak for Mark, but man, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did. It went by real quick. I know we've been at this for a couple hours now, but it went by real fast.
It really did.
And I'm glad it's not my edit.
Well, you know what? We are very opinionated when it comes to music, and that's not including all other stuff we talk about. In fact, we're still going on now as we speak.
Mm. And we will after the fact, you know.
That's also true. All right, guys. We thank you for hanging out with us. We have more to come next week. We have some really cool topics to touch on. So enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll catch you then.
Later.